You're listening
to the CD Baby
CD Baby
DIY
Musician Podcast.
Hey there, and welcome to the CD Baby DIY Musician Podcast. My name is Kevin, and joining me for this Roundtable edition is Chris and the Bolt.
Hello there.
Howdy.
I should say that this is our 127th episode.
That's right.
I was counting up the other day. I think this might be our 8th episode in, like 3 months.
Yeah, we're on a roll.
We've already beat last year and the year before as far as the number of podcasts we've done.
What's made the difference?
I don't know. There's been some new interesting things going on. I think that's part of it. What else? I don't know. Caffeine? What do you think?
We I think we just decided. I think that we were sort of dragging our feet. We had we had so much work going on at CD Baby that we were just constantly feeling overwhelmed. And finally, we decided if we're going to do this thing, we have to do it. The work at CD Baby is not going to go away. We just have to make it happen.
That's true. But you know what else helps make it happen? Is the listeners.
That's right.
Actually, that sounded cheesy, I know, but we've been getting so many kind emails from people who have just discovered the podcast or longtime listeners, like, when are you guys going to come back? And actually, that's really what made us go, all right, we got to deliver. The audience has spoken. But beyond that, what really helps is we've been getting a large number of calls lately, and it is so much more fun and easier to pull off episodes when you guys are interacting with us, especially on some of the hot topics that us musicians love to talk about. We got a great email from a listener named Mark, who we were going to read later, about his experience with Pandora. Because today we're going to be talking about the Pandora issue.
That's right.
So we're going to start things off a little differently, though. But before we dive into some of the goodies for today, speaking of listener feedback, I should let you know our listener line, it's always open. Operators are standing by. It's 360-524-2209. It's listed on the podcast website as well, which is cdbabypodcast.com. If there's something you want to weigh in on, call that number, leave a message. Try to keep it, a minute to 2 minutes at the most, and it makes it easier for us to include it in an episode. But, your feedback's great. You can also email us at podcast@cdbabypodcast.com. But before we get into the Pandora discussion, which has been heated lately, before we get into that, I know the Bolt and I have been doing a lot of music creation on things like the iPad.
Yeah.
And been getting into a lot of apps.
And I've been recording live with analog gear.
Yeah, you're still old.
Trying to go the opposite.
You're still old school looking for that record deal.
Yeah. I'll let you know how the shopping it around is going.
Yeah. Don't worry, we know.
No, but
No, you actually have some excellent music that is probably very worthy of being on a label.
Good save. Thank you.
But back to the app music creation. This plays into what's going to be coming up in just a few moments. We've been making a lot of music on apps.
Yeah, I've been trying out different apps, looking at the different music creation apps that are available in the Apple iPad store, and there's just a lot of cool stuff you can do, and I really feel like this is probably what most young people are, cutting their teeth on as far as music creation and recording and stuff, is these iPad apps, and I think it is kind of the future in a way. It's a great introduction to music, and it's so cool to be able to just sit down for an hour and create something that sounds great. And it's most of it's not probably studio worthy stuff, but it sounds good, and you can export it. And we'll be featuring some of the tunes we've been working on in the podcast. So, we'll also mention the different apps that we use to create them in the podcast notes.
Yeah. So, for me, it's been a huge boost in creativity, mainly just because of issues with time. and also with having small kids around, I can't always crank up the guitar amps. And but some of the sounds and things have come such a long way that we've been creating a lot of music and are trying to use more and more of it in the podcast episodes, and hopefully we'll feature a bunch in this episode.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the bolts because
I'm using this great app called iMini, and it's a Moog synthesizer that you can also tie in with these other samplers and drum machines and stuff like that. And it's a really cool app, but it just took me it's taken some trial and error with me sort of to master it. And I've had a couple of pieces that I've gotten almost there, and then they crashed, or I did something goofy and lost it, or anyway, I have been making attempts, and hopefully we'll have some more music soon.
Yeah.
I have a very newbie question for you guys.
Yes, sir.
With these apps, can you export the individual track files, or do you have to sort of export it as a finished mix?
You can, in GarageBand for the iPad, you can export the GarageBand file and then continue working on it on your computer. So, and that's probably one of the biggest weaknesses of a lot of the apps, is getting the content out of the app. But the interesting thing is there's some apps that allow you to connect things together better than what you can do on some of your computers.
So you can use multiple iPad apps together to create
so
music.
that's been a really cool thing. And to tie this up and get to kind of the point of why we started talking about this, it's been kind of a big part of the last couple album releases that I did with Small Town Poets, as far as using IK Multimedia's iRig. It's how you plug your guitar into the iPad and use with Amplitude, their guitar modeling app. And it was just played a big part in that role, and I happened to meet them at NAMM. And I know we don't normally do product reviews on the podcast, but they sent me the iRig HD and said, hey, will you review it on the podcast? So I said, sure. It fit naturally in with what we've been doing and kind of where music creation is going. So here's my review of the iRig HD. The new iRig HD by IK Multimedia takes iOS guitar and bass recording to a whole new level. If you're new to the iRig and IK Multimedia line of products, the iRig HD is the actual interface that connects your guitar or bass to your iOS device like the iPad or iPhone. It's specifically designed to work with the Amplitude app, which is the leading guitar modeling app for iOS and listed as one of the essential music apps in the Apple App Store. Having been an avid user of the original iRig, I was eager to get my hands on the new HD version to see just how much better it could possibly be. First off, the iRig HD uses the Lightning port or the 30-pin port instead of the headphone jack. So when you plug it in, the first thing you'll notice is that it's a super clean, noise-free signal. So much so that when I plugged it in, I thought it might not be connected. Another big improvement is the input level adjuster and 3-color LED indicator, which gives you a better idea of your signal strength. For me, the new iRig HD, along with my iPad, has become a staple in my music writing and practice arsenal. Most of my guitar parts for the past 2 Small Town Poets releases were first written using the iRig. Also, the song functionality is pretty much how I practice for every gig these days. You can import a track from your music catalog and loop sections and even slow it down. With the release of the iRig HD, IK Multimedia has also added a complete multi-track studio into the Amplitude app. That, combined with their built-in drum loops, makes creating and editing tracks a cinch. Now, just so you don't think IK Multimedia paid for this review, I will say that they can definitely improve the in-app purchase functionality. Sometimes just touching the screen in certain places or moving elements around gives you the "you're about to make a purchase" pop-up, which is very confusing and ensures that I don't let my young kids open the app. Also, while I love the guitar sounds for practicing and demoing songs, I'm still not there with using the guitar sounds for keeper tracks. However, I'm sure that in 5 years, I won't be able to tell the difference between my 60s Fender amp and what these apps do. The iRig HD will cost you about $99 at stores like Musician's Friend, but you can find it just about any place that sells Apple products. As a guitar player who uses the iPad, I would call the iRig HD a must-have. And that's my review of the iRig HD. All right, so that was my review of the iRig HD. It's a really cool tool. It's kind of become a staple for me with recording ideas, especially, and practicing. And so a lot of the music, like we said, that you probably be hearing from this point forward in the podcast is going to be from apps and such, just because it's so easy to create and it makes it fun. I know some people are probably rolling their eyes going, that's not real music creation, but
Right.
they haven't tried it. It's so much fun. So, all right, let's get to the Pandora discussion. Well, first off, I got a question. Are all of you using Pandora?
I use Pandora, yeah.
I use it occasionally, and my music is on it. So I guess I use it in two ways.
Well, I, for the longest time, was sort of just indifferent towards Pandora, mainly because I didn't like the audio quality of the streaming. But I think I hadn't really stumbled upon the best way to approach using it because, I think what's important for this discussion, just in case you haven't used Pandora, it's not like Spotify. And I think that's where we'll find out as we start discussing this. People start lumping a lot of services into the same boat, and it causes a problem.
Yeah.
But it's called non-interactive streaming, and you can type in an artist, and it starts a channel of music, possibly by that artist, but also related to that artist through their Music Genome project. There's plenty of information online about how they do that. It's worth checking out. But the interesting thing, how I started using it recently and actually subscribed to Pandora.
You actually pay for it.
Yes, it was late one Friday night. Things were getting wild and crazy at my house, to the point where I start thinking about, is my music on Pandora? Really crazy.
Yeah.
Friday night.
You were doing some really deep soul searching.
And then it really got off the rails when I started wondering if there was any money in Sound Exchange for us. So anyway, I opened up Pandora wondering, hey, did I ever submit the Hello Morning records to Pandora? I thought I did, but I couldn't remember. So I type in Hello Morning. And like I said, it doesn't bring up the artist that you were looking for. It starts a channel based on the music. So it started a channel, and I was loving all the music it was spitting out. And I thought, hey, these are all bands that I would love to, it'd be a great bill with Hello Morning. Or I just had never heard of these bands before. And I started bookmarking bands and taking note of who they were. And then finally a Hello Morning track came up, so I did verify that we were there. But, at that point, I might have been a couple adult beverages into the evening and somehow found myself subscribing to Pandora One to get the better audio quality, to try it out and get commercial free. And I've been using it a lot ever since and been loving it and been finding a lot of great bands that I would never find otherwise. So that was all happening when this, big discussion about Pandora in the media was exploding. And so I've become an avid user of Pandora. And so that's why I was very curious to hear from our artist.
So take warning now, folks. If you listen to Pandora late at night while having a couple of adult beverages, you may wake up in an unfamiliar place with a subscription to Pandora.
Yeah, at least I didn't get a Pandora tattoo across my chest or something.
But unlike a tattoo, it sounds like you don't regret your drunken decision.
No, it was. I've been enjoying it ever since. And you know what? The thing is, I've had Spotify, and it sits in my. The little startups menu there, and I never use Spotify because I open it and I don't know what to search for new stuff. Where with Pandora, like I said, the interesting thing where I finally got it was because I searched for something like Hello Morning, and then it started relating all these bands. It was actually a cool way to come up with some other sounds like bands that I could list for Hello Morning. Now that I'm like, oh yeah, that does kind of go, and that does kind of relate. So. But anyway, yeah. So I wanted to give. There's a couple resources online that I found, some recent articles that kind of sum up the issue quickly, and as far as what all the big deal about Pandora, what people are upset about, and then Chris has an article that that got a lot of people discussing the issue and upset, and then The Bolt has an article that's kind of gonna kind of shed more light on the topic. So let me just start with the basics. So this is from an article, Bloomberg Business, I believe it was, and they did a good job of summing it up. So it said, over the years, musicians have periodically rallied for performance rights. Frank Sinatra was a huge proponent, arguing that radio stations played his music because he sang it, not because someone else wrote it. But they had little success until 1995, when Congress passed the Digital Performance Right in Sound Recordings Act. Now, anyone who digitally broadcasts a song has to pay performance royalties. Key point there is anyone who digitally broadcasts a song has to pay performance royalties, and that's to the performing artist. Traditional AM/FM stations still don't have to pay because radio airplay has historically been seen as free publicity for record labels. When Sirius Radio launched its satellite radio service in 2002, Sound Exchange cut a private licensing deal that allowed the company to pay a fixed percentage of its revenue in royalties. Sirius currently pays about 8% of its revenue to artists and labels for performance rights. In 2009, Pandora agreed to pay Sound Exchange a 1/12 of a cent of each song it streamed, or 25% of its revenue, whichever number was greater. According to John Simpson, he was one of the original founders of Sound Exchange, that 0.12 cent rate was about 40% less than what other services paid. But because Pandora's revenue is so low compared with the number of people who use its service, the amount of money it pays to performers turns out to be about half of what it makes. So that is the core issue right there. Pandora and all the other the people streaming music, webcasters, anybody broadcasting digitally, which is Sirius XM and Pandora and a whole bunch of other people, all of them were forced to pay a performance right that traditional radio does not have to pay. And this performance right goes to the owner of the sound recording, which is the record label or the artist, and the featured performer. And all those royalties get paid through Sound Exchange. Totally different than what you get from ASCAP or BMI. That's for songwriters. And so this is something new that traditional radio has not been forced to pay, and believe me, they are lobbying hard to make sure they never do, although it's possible that legislation will be happening soon. So that's the issue.
They do pay those performance royalties in other countries for radio.
Correct.
In most other countries, right?
Most other countries,
Yeah,
not the U.S.
Yeah, in the U.S., we're the only ones in the major markets that does not pay a performance on these, or I should say, at least in the Western world. I know in Europe it's commonplace to pay these kind of royalties to the performer and the copyright or the sound recording owner. So, like they were saying, Frank Sinatra is a classic example. He's not a songwriter, and of course, people are listening to those songs because of Frank Sinatra. But he got nothing for however much radio play he the interest in him as an artist created. So
yeah.
So Congress said, well, we're going to fix it on the internet because the internet's new, and we're going to make services like Pandora pay a royalty rate. And they kind of pulled something out of the hat, and that's what they came up with.
It's probably worth, I know you mentioned it already, but it's probably worth restating as we talk about the term performance royalty. There's the one you've been mentioning, the Sound Exchange collects for a performance royalty that goes to the performers. And then there's also this thing called the performance royalty, which is for the performance of a piece of intellectual property, which goes to the publisher and songwriter. So that even though it's the same term, they're completely different things. So
yeah,
we should just keep that distinction clear.
And that's where a lot of people get confused on that point right there. And it really muddies the water of the argument that gets even muddier as we go along. So that's the key issue, is that traditional radio does not pay this. It's something that was new, leveled on digital broadcasters. Sirius and XM were making tons of cash, and so the fees didn't hit them as hard. Pandora, it's a new business model. it's something that's trying to find its way in profitability. It hit them really hard, and 50% of their revenue. And folks, if you're not a business person, revenue doesn't mean you get to keep the other 50%. That's just what they have to do, have to be able to keep their business open. So all the servers and things, their business expenses come off of that as well. So they're not really that profitable, if at all. And in fact, for most of their time, they have not been profitable. So that's really one of the key points. But Chris, you have an article that an artist, David Lowery, posted recently, and that got tons of attention. Kind of explain who he is and give us the highlights of his argument and why he is very much against Pandora.
Sure. So the article is called "My Song Got Played on Pandora 1 million times, and all I got was $16.89, less than what I make from a single T-shirt sale," which is a pretty brilliant title for a blog piece.
It worked.
It worked. It got shared at least dozens, if not hundreds of times in the news media. But David Lowery, if anyone doesn't know, is the singer of the band Cracker. They were really big in the kind of early to mid 90s. He was also in Camper Van Beethoven long ago. He, you know what? I should play the song. I have it here for anyone that wants to know the song that he's actually referring to.
You should.
Can you hear it?
Yeah.
Hey, like being stoned.
There you go.
All right, we got it. Any longer, they're going to come shut us down because we're not paying royalties.
Yeah. So that's the song that
if David Lowery finds out what we just did, he's not going to be happy.
Yeah. No, but we play it, of course, to recommend that people go and buy CDs and vinyl copies of David Lowery's music.
That song's named Low, right?
Low, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So that's the song that he's making reference to mainly in this article where he says 1,200,000 or something like that people heard it on Pandora, and in the end he was paid $16. As compared to some other royalty statements, all of his statements are shown in this blog post, where for Sirius satellite radio, I think he had like 200 plays and he got about $200, which I thought that's pretty good, $1 per play for him. Terrestrial radio, I think he had about 18,000 plays counted on his royalty statement, and he ended up with like $1,300. So for satellite radio and for terrestrial radio, there was a far smaller play count and a far larger payout. And then a couple other points that's probably worth making is that he's a 40% owner in the songwriter credit for this song. So you factor that in, and more actually was being paid out by all of those entities, but he received 40% of the songwriter share of the royalties. And obviously, he looked at those and he said, more than 1 million people, and all I'm getting is $16. That's ridiculous. So that's essentially his argument.
So it basically, in light of everything that has been going on with Pandora, this kind of fueled more of a firestorm that caused some Pandora to try and do some more positive PR that may have backfired on them a little bit,
or at least confused more people.
But David Lowery has become a big, outspoken person. He's got a blog. What is the name of his blog? The Tricordist. That's what it is. Yeah. Where you can read a lot of his statements. He's very much against a lot of the new services like streaming services and such, and just thinks the artists are getting ripped off by these services.
Yeah, so he thinks essentially artists are getting paid less in order to subsidize profits of technology companies, whether it be Apple or Google or Spotify, whoever. He thinks they're kind of getting rich and we're getting poor.
Yeah. And while at face value, when you read his article, assuming everything he states to be true. I mean, he's got a picture of a royalty statement. When did anyone ever post something erroneous on the internet that had a picture to go with it? It's very, very convincing to read, and we'll link to all these articles in the podcast notes so you can check them out and read through them yourselves. But there are some things that he doesn't really highlight, and that's we're gonna get to what the Bolt's got here for us. I posted a tweet after, in the middle of all this, that I think a lot of artists are actually doing more damage. Good intentioned artists are actually doing more damage than good, because I think they're unintentionally misleading a lot of folks. Because this is a really complex issue.
Yeah.
And the article that you were looking at,
right,
talking to the Bolt now, had a lot of facts and figures, percentages, numbers, and it is so easy to just get glazed over. And even in this guy's detailed research, there were some things that he still didn't have right. But give an overview of, tell us what it is, and give us an overview of what we've got here to go off of.
The article is by Michael DeGusta on his blog, The Understatement. And the title of the article is Pandora paid over $1,300 for 1 million plays, not $1,689. And basically the gist of it is that Pandora actually was responsible for paying out $1,300. It was just that David Lowery only received the $1,689 for it, and he goes on to explain how that money gets distributed to different people. Lowery only owns a portion of the publishing for his songs, so he doesn't get it all. He has to share it with other songwriters. He has to share it with his publishing company, and there's different kind of royalties that are distributed. There's the publishing royalty, and then also a performance royalty. And basically, when you add it all up, it's $1,300 for a million plays. You know, he could have written the article, arguably, I only got paid $1,300 for a million plays on Pandora, but it doesn't have the same zing. And
I think his article is correct, and that's
right,
what he got paid.
Right.
But I think where he's unintentionally misleading folks is he doesn't tell them the whole picture of the pie, the whole, okay, because of a deal I signed myself.
Right, with a record label.
With a record label who has a publishing entity, and all those rights I signed away, this is all I get from this song. Right. That's a different story. It's not as sexy and controversial, but that's something that plays a huge role in this, that this article really highlights. Okay, he's not really giving us the whole picture.
Right. And one of the things that's particularly interesting is that, we often think of internet radio and radio as similar things, but the thing is that with radio, you get paid per play on the radio, which you could be reaching thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of ears. People, yeah. With radio or with internet radio, they just count per person, and they pay based on per person that hears your song on the internet. So it's much more accurate. But if you were actually to average out the amount of money that is paid per person on the internet to per person listening to the radio, Pandora would actually be paying out more per person. So
a lot more
per person.
I was trying to do the math earlier today, and I'm no mathematician, so eventually I gave up. But at the point I gave up, I realized, whoa, if we could pick an average, say X equals 10,000 people for terrestrial radio play, then Pandora is playing way more per person reached than radio is. And
I think that part of the problem and why this is so controversial is that, originally radio was promotion for selling albums. if the internet had come along and people thought of the internet radio as just a promotion for selling albums, this wouldn't be that big of a deal. But I think it's that artists are now looking to streaming as a primary source of income, and they're not looking at it as just a vehicle to sell albums, and therefore they're getting a lot more nitpicky about these percentages per play.
Yeah, and also I think the point you touched on that I think is one of the core issues that even that I see in like very well, I should say, like trusted news sites, most of them have a strong sense of the business side of Pandora and how, how they're trying to please stockholders and their financial situation, but they usually lack an understanding of the music business. And then I find on the music business side that a lot of the folks on the music business blogs don't really understand still all the royalty scenarios. A lot of them haven't been artists. A lot of them have never had a copyright generate revenue for them as both the songwriter or as the artist, and kind of see those revenue streams come in, and it kind of has a light bulb go off. Now I get it. Now I understand where all these things are coming from.
Yeah.
And so I still see some of these, like in that article where he breaks it all down. There was something that Chris pointed out to me that he had wrong that I remember reading about.
He was kind of erroneously comparing one kind of performance royalty to another, and he was in the article that the Bolt was summarizing. That author was making a claim that David Lowery was talking about his performance royalties incorrectly or something, but they were talking about the different kind. Each of them was referring to the different performance royalty. Yeah, if that makes any sense. And I think to harken back to the point that you made earlier, Kevin, about only these digital services having to pay the sound recording performance royalty. Not only is Pandora per listener, per end user, per end hearer, paying more to the artist on the publishing side, but it's also the only person having to pay the sound recording performance royalty, and terrestrial radio doesn't even have to pay that. So
yeah, so I think I went back and listened to my interview with Tim Westergren that I did a long time ago. I was really sick that day. You can hear it. Not one of my better interviews, but and we don't dive into this issue much, but I've actually been on a panel with him before where more of these issues were discussed, and seen him speak on different occasions, and seen a lot of videos online. Part of the issue is that they feel sort of like the punching bag because of what you're stating. No one else has to pay this. A random royalty was pulled out of the hat based on business models that didn't even exist then. And it was more in line with what a traditional broadcast, like XM in mind, than with these new emerging streaming type services.
It's a good royalty, though. It's just that everyone should be paying it.
Yeah, it's a royalty that I'm not saying that Pandora shouldn't have to pay it. I'm just saying that they feel a little bit like, these things are somewhat being set arbitrarily, and not in a way that, believe me, when they roll these out to terrestrial radio is going to ensure they pay nothing or next to nothing. I can't remember what it was, but there was something on the ballot, at least here in Oregon, about radio stations needing to pay something, and all the broadcasters were calling it the
Freedom of Radio Act?
Yeah, the Radio Freedom Act or something. And there was all these, emotional ads that if this passes or something, all these radio stations will be shut down. And I'm like, no, they will not. So, anyway, so that's part of the issue, that it's still kind of working out, okay, what really should be the proper royalty? How should we really base this? And so they reduced the rate, like I said earlier, to 25% of its revenue. And I think they're still lobbying for some sort of adjustment, and that's some more of the recent PR mishandlings that they've had. They had a bunch of petition for artists to sign to support Pandora, and the way it came off, it just sounded funny and things like that.
You know how they bought that radio station recently in like North Dakota or something like that?
Yeah, that we report.
At first, I thought they were up to something shady, but as we've been looking at all these numbers, now I wonder, and maybe they've already announced why they were doing it, but I was suspecting that they bought the terrestrial radio station so they could operate it for a little while and then compare the numbers and say, see, we've been telling you all along. Now we own both these businesses, and terrestrial radio is scamming everyone, and we're getting screwed.
Yeah,
we being Pandora.
Yeah.
Well, the reason, as I understood it, that they bought it is so that they could pay lower royalties.
Well, it was all speculation. They never actually said why they bought it.
Oh, okay.
At least what I saw. It was speculation that, one, it was either a publicity stunt to highlight the fact of the insanity of the issue.
Right.
Because apparently there was a loophole that if you owned a terrestrial station, like, KNRK 94.7 here in Portland, they have their HD version that streams online where actually they have a channel that's all local music. And that's one of the places that, when I looked at Sound Exchange, that I know that Hello Morning's money has been coming from. They pay royalties there, but they pay far less because they're tied to a terrestrial station.
Right, right. I mean, all radio stations these days have some sort of internet
and they
component.
Apparently they get a different rate. And so that was they speculated that. Or, they never stated why. So yeah, it's interesting. Maybe they just want to, run a radio station and say, you're screwing everybody. So we've got a letter here from a listener. His name's Mark Aaron James. It's kind of long. I'm going to read it all because I think it's pretty interesting. We heard some of David Lowery's perspective, and I think this is a little bit more of an indie artist perspective of kind of having what he calls a love-hate relationship with Pandora. So it's a longer letter, but I think you'll enjoy hearing Mark's experience and his take on the Pandora issue. Hi, guys. My name is Mark Aaron James. I'm a full-time musician and longtime listener of the podcast based in New York City. I have a love-hate relationship with Pandora that I thought would be very relevant for your upcoming show about the service. It sort of mirrors the "is it worth it to play for free" argument. Sometimes exposure is worth it, but it's still frustrating. I should stress the love-hate probably still leans towards the love, as I owe a huge chunk of my career to them. I got in on Pandora pretty early when playing at the CMJ festival several years ago. They put my first 2 CDs through the Genome Project and linked me to Bare Naked Ladies, They Might Be Giants, and a little unknown artist named Jonathan Colton. CD Baby, he's been on the podcast before, I should say.
That's right.
I immediately saw a jump in fans from the exposure to the Bare Naked Ladies and They Might Be Giant camps. Then, when Jonathan Colton's Thing a Day podcast took off, there were a bunch of rabid online fans looking for everything associated with him. Again, I got a big push. This led to a big fish in Colton's fandom, Mike Spiff Booth, taking an interest in one of my songs. If you aren't familiar with him, he is a computer artist who gained YouTube fame by making Worlds of Warcraft music videos for Colton's songs. Most of his videos have over 2 million hits. After hearing me on Colton's Pandora station, he made a video for my song, Aquaman's Lament. You can YouTube search that and Spiff's other songs. His videos are amazing. These things combined, along with a lot of touring and online presence, has led to me being a musician full-time. I am well aware that I am very lucky and work my butt off. So now, the hate part. First of all, if I had a similar song on terrestrial radio 10 years ago that got millions of plays, 500,000 video views, and tens of thousands of indie sales, I would A, hit the charts, B, get a substantial residual check, and C, get some play on corporate stations. I think my biggest Sound Exchange check has been $90. That includes all my other songs, which I get a bit of play as well. It has been a couple of years now, and I still average $70 to $40 per payment. Nothing to sneeze at, but boy, I wish the exposure had happened in the early 90s when the song really would have taken off, resulting in a decent wage and other opportunities. It can be argued, however, that many of the people who come to my shows would have never heard of me were it not for the initial Pandora exposure. The other part of the hate is I have made 3 more CDs since the release of my album, just to satellite. They're equally awesome, if I say so myself, and one has a follow-up song to Aquaman's Lament called Batman's Reply. They continue to sell, make noise online, and I continue to tour. I have sent these new CDs to Pandora twice, following the instructions on their website. They have never responded to my submissions or added any of the new material. Despite having my own channel on Pandora and thousands of listens a month, I can't communicate with them or get my new material on the site. To be fair, I haven't tried hard enough. I'm sure that if I sent repeated letters or appealed to my fan base to send requests, it'd probably happen. I will get on that before my new release comes out in January. Still, I get the impression that Pandora has become one of the big out-of-touch companies instead of the music champion that it started out as. I'm sure that they are getting a lot more requests for ads than they used to, but still, I'm already on there getting listens. I should be able to add my new CDs without too much effort. So in closing, I think it's a valuable site in that it introduces people to new music. It is one of the few outlets where people don't only hear what they ask for, but also similar artists, often unsigned. I love that. They also launched my career. I love that. They said they pay next to nothing and aren't as accessible as they used to be. I'm not sure a new artist can get their material on there anymore. It's like the radio station that used to have a great DJ with his finger on the scene that gets bought by a corporate company and moves to a playlist set by executives out of town. I would be happy to discuss it further if you'd like. Keep up the great work. Love the podcast.
That's cool.
So I thought there was lots of great details in there. It seemed more relatable to our audience of independent musicians. The one thing I would say that I think, again, he sort of relates having lots of listens, plays on Pandora to having equal weight as a single play on a radio station, which isn't entirely accurate.
Right.
But and one of the big things, like we said, that artists tend to equate the two as the same. A Pandora play is someone sitting at home by themselves, most likely, or at the office, listening to a song. Or major radio station, you know, you're probably, if it's the big pop station in town, depending on the size of your city, could have 100,000, 500,000 people listening at that time. So, big difference. So, anyway, I thought that was a great perspective. He highlights the idea of them falling maybe out of graces with the indie music community. And I think that's why I was so indifferent to Pandora for the longest time. I always get tired of people like saying, hey, we're here for, because they say they're here to, build the middle-class musician or help the middle-class musician. And I think it's easy to go, no, you're not, because you don't let anybody submit their music.
Yeah.
And the more I thought about it and started using it, I'm like, okay, all the music that I've been bookmarking on Pandora and liking are bands, again, most of them are independent. 2, I've never heard of them. And 3, I never would have heard of them any other way. It's just...
And I never would have faulted them I never have faulted them for curating the content. I think that's what's brilliant about it is they're actively deciding what goes into their genome, and then they're spending a ton of personal attention on each song, to help your experience as a listener. So the fact that it's not open to everyone, I don't think necessarily negates their attempts to build a musical middle class.
Yeah.
I think they can do both.
Yeah, and I think in their attempt to build a music middle class, it's more in the recommendation than actually in the royalties they pay out, in my mind. And not saying that they're not paying enough or whatever, but the idea that it's not going to amount to a ton unless you're getting a lot of plays. But I love Mark's story here about how it connected him with fans of people that had something cool going on, and he got to ride the wave. But it is frustrating that, he's got more releases, has lots of plays of previous albums, but they're pretty inaccessible to add, where if you are a label, that stuff's getting added right away.
Right.
So some interesting perspective there. I love the feedback. If you've got a story about Pandora, we'd love to hear it. Give us a call at 360-524-2209 or email us at podcast@cdbabypodcast.com.
We could also mention on the DIY Musician blog, there's an article, I think it's called How to Get Your Music on Pandora, written by Michael Zapruder, who is their music curator.
Yeah, it's surprisingly easy to submit. You do have to have a CD. Your music must be in CD format, and it must be for sale on Amazon.com in both physical and digital formats. And CD
Which
Baby
it will be, yes.
CD Baby can do that for you, but if you've got a digital-only release, they say they won't put it up there. So just know that. I do have, I want to close out with some comments from Pandora. First off, in regards to the money situation, John Simons, the former, he was one of the founders of Sound Exchange. I don't believe he's with the company anymore, but he says that Pandora has made a conscious choice not to monetize, and pointing out that the service could easily add more commercials or try to boost its paid subscriber rate, and that they should definitely not get a discount from what everyone else pays, like XM satellite radio. And so he's pointing to the fact that he thinks that Pandora just hasn't tried hard enough to monetize and improve their profit situation.
Right. And sometimes I feel that way too. And I wonder if, I almost feel like, if Pandora can't figure it out, can the rest of the music industry maybe come together and help them out? Because we all want this to work, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And we'll link to an article that Pandora posted just a couple weeks ago with their key responses to a lot of the negative press recently. And one of them is, the first falsehood being disseminated is that Pandora is seeking to reduce artist royalties by 85%. That is a lie manufactured by the RIAA and promoted by their hired guns to mislead and agitate the artist community. We have never, nor would we ever advocate such a thing. I challenge the RIAA to identify a statement from Pandora that says we seek to reduce royalties by 85%. So that's one of their key issues. And, it is frustrating when you start dealing with big industries and lobbyists. We see it every time there's a presidential election. People take half sentences or groupings of words or sound bites and make gigantic statements around it. And in Pandora's defense, I think that's kind of what's happened on that particular issue. So the second thing they say is, the second confusing and contentious issue is the amount of money paid for each song spin on Pandora. There's a tremendous amount of misinformation being spread on this topic as well. First, we need to clarify what a spin on Pandora means. Each spin on Pandora reaches a single person compared to a play on FM radio that reaches potentially millions of people. In other words, a million spins on Pandora might be equivalent to a single play on a large FM station. How much we pay in royalties for a million spins? Around $1,300. And that goes in line with that other article.
Right.
So that's some valid points in kind of what they've been saying.
And if we were to assume that FM station had 1 million listeners, the one play on the terrestrial radio station would reach 1 million people, and you would make, if you were David Lowery and go 40% of your publishing, you'd make 7 cents. If you reached 1 million people on Pandora, you'd make $1,300, or his cut of it, which was $16 plus like $500 or something for the Sound Exchange. It was hundreds of dollars. So quite a bit more than 7 cents.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, I'm curious to hear more feedback from artists on this topic, but I would just encourage everyone to not, to really understand the issue. I know what we discussed today here is probably just scratching the surface, and I don't know, half of it might have been wrong anyway.
Don't say that.
No, but just try to understand and not just get in the emotional bandwagon, because there is some services out there that are screwing artists. And there are some services that out there that are probably not the most beneficial to artists. And or their model long-term artists are still unclear of. Let's just say that the ramifications to the artist living is still unclear. I would say that Spotify falls into that with some recent news about Tom York pulling his catalog. And so I want to make sure that artists don't equate things like Spotify as the same as Pandora, because they are two different things. One's non-interactive, meaning you can't select the songs. It's like radio. Or interactive, where Spotify, where you can select the music you listen to. Strangely,
so Spotify does have a non-interactive radio. I'm screwing up the terminology, but they basically have a Pandora equivalent.
Yeah. So
Spotify radio.
So just trying to keep all those things clear when you're reading this, and knowing that just because one guy on the internet's passionate, just dig a little deeper, find out, I think right now, my opinion is, I think Pandora is actually a good thing for independent artists. It's probably a much better thing than just a flat out streaming service where people may feel less compelled to buy. But ultimately, I still say, as an independent artist, when your number one issue is reaching fans, I want my music to where people are actually listening to music. So.
Yeah. Totally.
So, but we'd love to hear your thoughts. Again, the listener line is 360-524-2209, podcast at cdbabypodcast.com. We're probably going to have a whole nother episode of just Pandora feedback if we get it. So it'll be interesting. And this is going to continue to be a developing story. There's news headlines about Pandora practically weekly. All right. Well, that'll do it this time. I hope that helped bring some clarity and thought to the issue. That's all.
See ya.
See ya.
You've been listening to the CD Baby DIY Musician Podcast, broadcasting from Portland, Oregon, USA.